All right, so we're going to continue on with our series about the DLED7NC, the full spectrum dedolight. It's a fine point focusing light source. There's other videos that I've done about this so that you can get some generalizations about it, get an overview, see it with optics. So what we're going to do today is something that I think is really important, because a lot of you who are going to shop for the full spectrum light are going to say to yourselves, well, if I get this, why do I need to have a bicolor light? Maybe I should just forego the bicolor light and just get the full spectrum light and call it a day. I think we're going to look at this, and you may think differently about it after you see a side-by-side and we do a little comparison here. And it really boils down to three simple things: shadow qualities, output in the most used spectrums of light, and beam focusing range. So if those things are important to you, which I assume they are, then you may want to consider keeping a bicolor light in your arsenal. So let's take a look at them side by side and get some readings and see where they really differ. All right, so I'm going to turn on the full spectrum light here. I use the ChromaLink app to control the light. It's just a lot easier. Look at some of the other videos and you'll see why. We're set at 5600. And we're going to go between 3200 and 5600, the most used in the white light range, just because generally speaking it gives you a really good idea of what you're looking at, and it gives you kind of a really normalized data point to look at and say, okay, I get it, I can compare that against everything else. So we're set at 5600. We're going to do that because in this light there is no white diodes. There's 6 channels: red, green, blue, cyan, amber, and lime. And those are being blended to make white light. So we really want to see what shadow qualities look like from that, because if we're getting dirty shadows, then we may want to consider using a white light for those ranges of light. So I'm 10 foot from the wall, and if I get an object up close to this light, you can see where 6-channel lights kind of, show themselves a little bit more, which is in the outline of shadows. You'll see that there are some spectral shifting that's going on, a little bit of rainbows. And this is where, if this is important to you, casting a shadow and being a little closer to the light, if that is something important to you, then this may not be the setting that you want to do. A reading here is going to give us about 20-foot candles in the center of the beam. And then we're going to narrow that down to its tightest spot, which is 15 degrees. So from 50 to 15 degrees. It's important that I reiterate why this light is special and different from other 6-channel lights. It's because it's actually a fine point focusing light, full spectrum focusing light, something to keep in mind. Okay, so again, I'm going to look at the reading from 10 feet in full spot, and I have 62-foot candles. So a nice optical range there. And we're going to do the same thing at 3200. And the nice thing about the full spectrum light is that it really retains a ton of punch. The saturation levels are huge in this 6-channel light, and so I'm getting basically the same reading at 3200 that I am in 5600. "64-foot candles, so maybe even a drop higher. I'd say that's pretty much the same based on this old school light meter. Okay, the only way to be fair about testing these lights is to keep the full spectrum light in daylight and tungsten values, right? That's the only way that we're going to be able to compare it against the light that we use 90% of the time, which is bicolor light, anywhere between 2700 and 6600, which is what the DLE7N Bi does. That is all dedicated tungsten and daylight diodes between that range. And when you're using that 90% of the time on set, it just makes sense to take a look at this and see why you may want this alongside the full spectrum light. So let's bring this up at 5600 as well. All right. Now immediately we're going to see maybe it's going to be a little bit fuller on the focusing range, so a little bit wider and narrower. But we're full up right now at 5600. We're the same range, 10 foot that we tested the full color light from, so let's get a reading here and look at some shadow qualities. Again, up close to the light, we're not seeing any of the spectral shifting going on. No fringing. This is much cleaner. This is what you would expect more from a bicolor or a monocolor light. If that is important to you, then you do want to have a more powerful bicolor light in your arsenal. And as I get closer, of course, that's going to get sharper and crisper. I'm going to take a reading here, and I have 32 foot candles from 10 feet. I believe that's roughly double that of the full spectrum light. And then I'm going to narrow it down to what is 8 degrees on the spot side for a Dedo light. Again, if you've never used a Dedo light before, that's what they do well. We use optics to make focusing mechanisms that give you a lot of optical range. So 8 degrees full spot, 15 degrees full spot. You're going to get more intensity just out of the fact that you can narrow down the beam by double. And let's take a look at what the output is here. 10 foot at 5600, we have 185 foot candles. So that's nearly 3 times, I believe, the output. We're also going to put that at 3200 as we did previously with the full spectrum light. So here we are, and get another reading. $155 foot candles. So if white light is important to you and having punch is important to you, you're going to want to still have a bicolor light on set. And because they're the same size, same scale, of course, you can build kits with these interchangeably, you know, throwing one into a slot in a kit that's built for the same size light, not a big deal. Having, you know, a sibling to the bicolor light and a full spectrum light obviously has its perks, which I might not have to describe for you, but we'll look at it anyway. The final thing we're going to just look at here is one of the more obvious things, which is using barn doors on both of these lights. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn them both on at 5600, and then we're going to set the, go full up here on the both lights. We're going to offset them so you can actually see the full spots side by side on both the bicolor and full spectrum version to understand the focusing range and how much spottier the bicolor light can get and how much more punch you can get out of it. And then I'm going to put a barn door on both of the lights, and I'm going to put just, it's like a little rectangular shape that I'm cutting out of it. The most obvious and used accessory to cut light without gripping. And I'm going to flood these lights out. And see the difference here. So, spectral anomalies going on around the outside edges of each door. That is to be expected from a 6-channel light. Here on the bicolor side, you're seeing what you would expect or hope to see from using a barn door. Beautiful drop off, the shape is really nice, everything is even except when it gets to the drop off, and that would be something you would probably want to use if you're trying to cut with barn doors or grip up close to the light. The bicolor light certainly is what I would use for something like that. There is another barn door that we use. You've seen it in other videos, so let's take a look at the wide-angle lens adapter, the Delwar. Now, the Delwar, again, widens the beam out and extends the light ratio from 50 degrees in full flood out to 90 degrees in full flood. And it also gives you the ability to use dynamic barn doors that rotate. So you can make a trapezoidal shape to light from an angle and cut a square, let's say, for example. So I'm at full flood on both of these lights, and magically we're just going to cut a couple of light beams here, side by side, to take a look at the shadow qualities of both of those lights. And you can see, again, we have some spectral stuff going on the outside edges of the full spectrum light, but it looks pretty good. If you're going to use barn doors and you're going to use the 6-channel DLED7NC, I would definitely use the wide-angle lens adapter with some barn doors to cut some pretty cool shapes and feel good about the drop-off. It's also going to be a tighter drop-off. They're larger barn doors further away from the light, so the drop-off is going to be more shallow than using standard barn doors. But over here on the bicolor side, obviously we have really crisp, homogeneous, beautiful light. In the drop-off, it's the same, what you would expect to see. So it's tighter, cleaner, and also double the output. So to wrap it up, I'd say that having obviously both of these lights in your arsenal would be my choice. I would want at any given point to be able to use the punchiness of this bicolor light to get the most used spectrums on set, 90% of the time using that. That's what I would want. And then I would want this full spectrum multicolor light to do stuff like this, because it does a billion other things that a bicolor light can't do well. So it's pretty straightforward, it's pretty simple. They're wonderful siblings that actually get along, so I would bring them everywhere together. That's what I would do. So that's my recommendation. I would probably set them both up and get as much flexibility as you can creatively on set.